Hello everybody, Harry from GMAT Ninja here, and welcome to the next episode in our series on critical reasoning for the GMAT and the executive assessment. Now in this series we've been looking at the various different ways that people go wrong in critical reasoning questions. And so in today's video what I want to take a look at is falling in love with an answer choice. Now what I mean by that, let me sort of describe a bit of a scenario to show you what I mean by that. Let's say you're doing a critical reasoning question. You read the passage and you understand it and everything's going well. You read the question, you know exactly what you're meant to do. And let's say you read A. You're like, that's the answer. That's it. Done. No way anything else can be the answer. This is over. This is finished. And you just skim through B, C, D, and E. You don't really give them the care and attention they deserve. And so when you come to check your answers, you find out that actually the answer wasn't A. You missed something, some small detail or some small nuance in A, or maybe you missed something in the passage and A looked really good when you did it, but it's not the answer. And if you'd just given B, C, D, or E more attention, the question would have gone much better. And it's a very common problem that our students have, and it's one we're going to take a look at today. I've got 3 questions lined up for you, one shortened one to begin with, and then 2 full questions to wrap this session up, where in these questions we've chosen them because in the past lots of our students have looked at one of the early answer choices and had that same reaction. They've just gone, that's it. This question's over. That's definitely the answer. What I want you to do when we look at these questions is to take your time. Yes, read the early ones. They might be the answer, they might not, but read the early ones, but give every answer choice enough care and attention so that you know whether that one's right or wrong. Now, one of the things we get into with a lot of these answer choices that we'll be dealing with today is people think about what they might call trap answers. I would make the argument that there are no trap answers in the GMAT. Reason for that is because if you think about how the questions are written, the question writers, in order to make a question difficult, the question writers have to write answer choices that might be close to the right answer. If 4 of the answer choices were way off and one of them was right, then the questions wouldn't be that difficult. So at least 2, maybe 3 of the answer choices in a difficult question are going to be really close to being right. And the challenge for you is to read them carefully enough and closely enough that you don't fall in love with something that isn't quite right. So, as I said, no trap answers, but just give each answer choice enough care and attention. Read them carefully as always, and we're hopefully going to get to the right answer here. All right, so with that said, I'm going to get the first question up on the screen. Shortened question, only 2 answer choices. So I'm going to give you about 1.5 minutes to take a look at this. Be careful. Don't fall in love. Read both the answer choices carefully. I'll see you back here to take a look at it very soon. All right, as always with these videos, if you need a little more time to take a look at this question, now's your chance to pause it, but we're going to jump in and take a closer look at this one together. All right, so this video is about not falling in love with answer choices, but the answer choices are a little further down the process. We still need to go through the passage. We still need to take a look at the question. So let's do that first, then we'll get to the answer choices a little later. All right, so this passage that we've been given, Ramirez is telling us something, and this is a kind of classic GMAT argument passage here. So the conclusion is going to be that final sentence that we know that, or we're told that lowering DVD prices and releasing them sooner would mitigate piracy's negative effects on film industry profits. That's the conclusion of our passage here. And we're given some evidence earlier. So the evidence that we're told about is that the film industry claims that pirated DVDs, which are cheaper than legitimate DVDs and become available well before, adversely affect its bottom line. So piracy affects the film industry's bottom line. And then we're told in the middle bit, and this is the big evidence here, that the consumers want, and I'm just going to make sure I'm using the exact language of the passage here, consumers want lower prices and faster releases. So because the film industry tells us piracy affects their bottom line, and because we are told consumers want lower prices and faster releases, therefore lowering the prices and releasing them sooner would mitigate piracy's negative effects on the film industry's profit. So we've got, fairly classic argument there. We've got some evidence, we build to a conclusion, and this question asks us to find the argument above relies on which of the following assumptions. So I've got two answer choices here. One of them is an assumption that the argument relies on, one of them isn't. All right, so let's jump in and take a look at these two. And as I said, this video is all built around which answer choices people fall in love with, and so we can probably fairly quickly see that A is not going to be our answer here. Now, this is an answer choice that lots of people choose. It's almost a third of the people that do this question will jump at A and think that A is the answer. So let's take a look at why you might think it's the answer before we look at why it isn't. So there's a couple of bits in here that certainly later on the answer choices, there's this reduction in the revenue the film industry receives from the film's theatrical release. Now, I've got to be very careful with the wording here. We were told film industry profits. That is different from revenue the film industry receives from the film's theatrical release. The film's theatrical release is different from the film's DVD release, and the revenue is different from the profits. So there's quite a bit of difference here. And so people jump on those words and they feel like A answers the question. Because if releasing legitimate DVDs earlier would not cause any reduction in the revenue, but the passage suggests that the film industry would increase the amount of money they receive from the DVD release, we'll put those two together and we've got this, will mitigate the piracy's effect on the film industry's profits. But we don't need A. The way this question works, the way an assumption question like this works, is we don't need A to be right in order for the conclusion to work. It's possible that releasing legitimate DVDs earlier would cause a reduction in the revenue the film industry receives from the film's theatrical release, but if that means that the amount of money the film industry receives from the film's DVD release increases more than they lost from the loss of money from the theatrical release, then it could still mitigate the effects, piracy's negative effects on the film industry's profits. So we don't need A to be correct. Even though, as I said, up to a third of the people that do this think that A looks really good and is the answer, mainly because they're focusing on those words, that revenue and theatrical release, and that doesn't quite match what's in the passage. A looks good at a first glance, but if you dig into the details, A is not going to be our answer here. So we could cross A out. Now, B tells us that some people who would otherwise purchase pirated DVDs would be willing to purchase legitimate DVDs if they were less expensive and released earlier than they are now. Now, if you think about this, we need this to be true in order for releasing the legitimate DVDs earlier and lowering their prices to make sense. If the film industry did that, if they released DVDs earlier, if they lowered their prices, but the people who would normally buy pirated DVDs aren't going to move to the legitimate DVDs, then there was no point making that move. So we need some people who would usually purchase pirated DVDs to now move to buy legitimate DVDs for this argument to make sense. So the argument relies on B. It needs B to be true in order for this argument to work. B's our assumption, B's our answer here. But as I hope you can see from this one, A looks tempting. It can draw you in. And as I said, about a third of the people that do this question get sucked into thinking that A is a good answer and they go for that one instead of B. So yeah, that's an idea of what we're going to look at in this video. I'm going to increase the difficulty really by giving you 5 answer choices. We've got 2 full questions here. I'm going to ramp the difficulty level up as we go through the video. As I said, don't get sucked in. A or B might look good, but let's consider them in the context of the whole question. Give each answer choice its due time and attention, and we'll see where we end up. All right, so full question coming your way. I'll give you 2 minutes to take a look at this one, and I'll see you back here soon. All right, if you need more time to take a look at this one, now's your chance to pause the video, but we'll jump in and take a closer look. All right, so we're in a video where we're talking about not falling in love with answer choices. I hope you've managed to give each of the 5 answer choices enough care and attention, and we'll check how you did when we get to the answer choices. But for now, let's take a step back, look at the passage, and we'll build up through this question. So once again, an argument passage here, so we should be looking for the conclusion, then we should be looking for the evidence for it. So the conclusion, when we've got that nice big marker, therefore, right at the end, the conclusion is that final sentence. So we could say, if the warming continues, the Guillemots, and I'm just going to put G here, the Guillemots range will probably be enlarged by extending northwards. And I'll add this last bit in, northwards along the coast. Don't know if that's necessary at this point. Probably should pay attention to it. I don't want to miss the question just because I've missed that bit along the coast there at the end. But yeah, our conclusion is that final sentence. If the warming continues, the Guillemots range will probably be enlarged by extending northwards along the coast. Now, the evidence that we're given for that is, well, we're given quite a bit of information here, so I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So the Guillemots feed on fish that gather beneath floating ice. And they need 80 consecutive snow-free days to raise chicks. And so this is what limited them to the South Arctic until the warming started. So quite a lot of information going on here, quite a lot happening in this passage. Yeah, we know that they feed on fish that gather beneath the floating ice, and we know that they need this period of snow-free days in order to raise their chicks. So for now, it's not been warm enough further north. They've been limited to the south of the Arctic. But as this warming trend continues, the passage tells us that, or the conclusion suggests that these Guillemots' range will be enlarged by extending northwards along the coast. That the amount of land they're going to be able to use is going to extend. All right, so we've got the passage nailed down. Let's take a look at the question. Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the argument? So fairly standard GMAT question here. We've got our argument, we've got our evidence, we've got our conclusion. Let's jump in, take a look at the answer choices and see where we end up. All right. So A tells us that even if the warming trend continues, there will still be years in which Guillemot chicks are killed by unusually early snow. Okay. That may be true. I'm sure that, there are some now that are killed by unusually early snow. There will be in the future, but that doesn't stop the Guillemot's range being enlarged by extending northward along the coast. That the A doesn't really affect this argument at all. So I'm going to cross A out there. Now, B tells us that if the Arctic warming continues, Guillemot's current predators are likely to succeed in extending their own range further north. First glance, this looks pretty good. If the predators go north, that might stop the Guillemot's range extending further north. And this is the answer choice that people begin to fall in love with. And slightly more than a quarter of the people who take this question will jump at B. They'll go, right, if the predators are there, the birds can't get there. That's going to weaken the argument. I'm going to say it's not that the birds can't get there. I'll accept that it would make it harder for the birds to get there. And so let's keep B for now. But what we're going to see as we go through this is that there's maybe a better answer coming later on. And so again, don't fall in love with B. Might like it for now. Let's leave it, but let's give the other answer choices enough care and attention to see what happens here. All right. So C tells us that Guillemots nest in coastal areas where temperatures are generally higher than in inland areas. I think, okay, we're not really worried about the temperature difference between, or the sort of the general temperature difference between coastal areas and inland areas. What we're looking at in this argument is what will happen to the Guillemot's range as the general, the warming trend will continue across both inland and coastal areas. And so C tells us, well, just in general, it doesn't matter if there is a warming trend, but just in general, coastal areas warmer than inland areas. But if that warming trend continues, the coastal areas where the Guillemots nest further north, the Guillemots nest at coastal areas. Those coastal areas further north will be warmer if the warming trend continues, so the Guillemots range could still extend further north along the coast. So C can be true, and that doesn't weaken the argument whatsoever. So let's cross C out. And then D tells us that if the Arctic warming continues, much of the thin ice in the southern Arctic will disappear. Now, this first glance doesn't look very good. Great. Warming is going to continue. Thin ice in the southern Arctic will disappear, but that will mean that the birds can continue extending their range further north. But I want to bring you back to this bit in the evidence here. These birds, the Guillemots, feed on fish that gather beneath floating ice. So if the Arctic warming trend continues and the thin ice in the southern Arctic will disappear, then the birds aren't going to be able to feed further south. And so their range might extend further north, but they won't be able to stay down further south. And so their range, and this is the bit we've got to be very careful about what the conclusion says. We were told that the range will probably be enlarged. And D comes along and says, well, the range might change, but possibly won't enlarge because, yes, they'll be able to move further north, but they won't be able to stay in the south. So D's a very strong weakener for the conclusion that the range will probably be enlarged. Okay, so they can extend further along the coast, but that range will probably not be enlarged. Let's go back to B. B was telling us that the predators are likely to succeed in extending their own range further north. Yeah, that will make it harder for the Guillemots to extend their range further north because they'll have to compete with the predators. But if we go back to B, we could say that, well, they already have the predators in the south and they managed to survive down there. So if they move north and the predators move north, won't they end up in the same situation? It will make it harder for them to extend their range further north, but it doesn't stop them. It certainly doesn't stop them as much as D does. B looked good at first glance, but D's probably a much better answer. So let's keep that and just check E to finish this question off. All right, E tells us that the fish that the guillemot eats are currently preyed on by a wider variety of predators in the southernmost Arctic regions than they are further north. Okay, we've got to ignore B. For now, we're just looking at E, so we don't know. Just by looking at E, we don't know if that wider variety of predators are going to be able to move further north as the warming trend continues as well. All we can go on is what E says. And from E alone, that doesn't really weaken the argument. I'd make the argument, I would argue that E actually strengthens the argument. That if the guillemots are able to move further north, they will have less competition for the fish that they eat. It's actually going to be easier for them to extend their range further north. And unlike D, we don't have anything stopping them staying in the south. So they're going to be able to extend their range. So they're going to be able to enlarge their range by extending northwards along the coast. And so we can cross E out and we'll keep D. All right, so as I hope you see here that B looked good. At first glance, B looked good. Yes, the predators are going to extend their range further north, and that will make it harder for the guillemots to also extend their range further north. But if you just jump at B and don't really consider C, D, or E, because B must be the answer, then you're going to get in trouble here. As I hope you saw, we left B, we kept it, but we moved further on. D was better, and we could go back and we could go, actually, B doesn't do a very good job of weakening the argument here, so we're going to choose D as our answer. All right, so one more question on the same theme. As we said throughout here, treat every answer choice as carefully as you can. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to take a look at this one. I'll see you back here soon. All right, for the final time today, if you want a little more time to have a look at this question, now's your chance to pause the video. But for now, we're going to jump in and take a closer look at it. All right, so this is my favorite question for dealing with this issue of falling in love with answer choices. It's question 3 in the video, so I hope you've managed to avoid falling in love with any one answer choice. I hope you've given all 5 of them the same level of care and attention. You've treated them independently of anything others. You've thought about them all, and we've got to an answer. We're going to deal with the passage and the question first before we get to the answer choices, and we'll see if you've managed to nail this question by the time we get to the bottom. All right, so let's deal with the passage first. And again, this is another one of those sort of classic argument passages. And so let's find the conclusion first. And it's the start of that final sentence. So our conclusion is that if they were not so brittle, so we've got that consideration in there. We're not worried about them breaking, but if they were not so brittle, one could reliably determine a rattlesnake's age. simply from the number of sections in its rattle. And if that's our conclusion, the evidence that we're given for that is that final part of that final sentence is because one new section is formed each time a rattlesnake molts. Okay, so the structure of our argument here, we've got our conclusion, we've got our evidence, and we know that because one new section is formed each time a rattlesnake molts, if the tails were not so brittle, we could reliably determine a rattlesnake's age just by counting the sections. Right, so there's our passage. Hopefully we've got a good understanding of that. And now we can get into the question, the answer choices. And the question asks us to find, so which one of the following is an assumption the argument requires? I'm going to focus on that word in a second. So which one of the following is an assumption the argument requires in order for its conclusion to be properly drawn? So the correct answer is going to be the answer choice that we need. We need this to be true in order for the conclusion to work here. All right, so let's go jump in and take a look at these answer choices. And we get to this one. We get to A. A looks really good. But, so let's take a look at it. If A was true, if we knew that rattlesnakes molt exactly once a year, well, then the conclusion looks pretty good. One could reliably determine a rattlesnake's age from counting the number of sections in its rattle because it molts once a year, and every time it molts, we get a new section. So I could just see a rattlesnake with 4 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that rattlesnake's 4 years old. Again, under the consideration they're not so brittle. Okay, but what is this question asking us to do? Let's not get sucked in. A looks really good, but do I need A? That's the difference. Do I need A to be true? I need to know that they molt at a regular period, but does it have to be exactly once a year? If they molted once every 6 months, could I still tell how old they were by counting the number of sections? Yeah. Again, if the rattlesnake had a tail of 12 sections and it molted every 6 months, I would know it was 6 years old. Or if it molted exactly once every 2 years, or molted exactly once every 9 months, or molted exactly once every 6 weeks. So A is good. It looks really good, and as almost half the people that do this question get sucked in and jump at A, it's like, well, we're done here. That's the answer and it's finished. But if you take a closer look and think about what is this question precisely asking me to do, I don't need to know A in order for the conclusion to be properly drawn. So A is actually not our answer here. I'm going to cross it out. I don't need it to be true. I need to know that they molt regularly, but exactly once a year, that's not necessary. Could be 6 months, could be 2 years, as we said, could be any, as long as it's a regular time period. A is not our answer. All right, B tells us the rattle of rattlesnakes of different species are identical in appearance. I'm not really worried about the appearance across different species. I'm worried about the number of sections here. So B doesn't really have anything to do with the argument we're trying to make, so I can cross B out. All right, C tells us that rattlesnakes molt more frequently when young than when old. And again, this is similar to A. It's like, okay, great, I know this. And by knowing that, maybe I'll be able to get to the conclusion, but I don't need it. Let's consider the opposite of C. If rattlesnakes do not molt more frequently when young than when old, if they molt at the same rate, no matter how old they are, I can still come to that conclusion. I don't need C to be true in order to make this conclusion, so I can cross C out. Right, now D tells us that the brittleness of a rattlesnake's rattle is not correlated with the length of the rattlesnake's life. And I think, okay, remember that consideration we had at the start of the conclusion. The conclusion already brings this brittleness into consideration, says that we shouldn't consider it. Yeah, they're going to break. That's what happens. But if they didn't break, then we could determine their age by the number of sections. So D, talking about the brittleness and whether or not it's correlated with the length of the rattlesnake's life, doesn't have anything to do with the argument because we've already taken brittleness out as a consideration. And so D's gone. All right, E's the only answer choice left, so hope it's right, but let's take a closer look. And E tells us that rattlesnakes molt as often when food is scarce as they do when food is plentiful. Now, quite often when I'm doing this question with a student, we'll just get the reaction that, well, the passage didn't mention anything to do with food. What could E possibly have to do with this answer? And knee-jerk reaction, usually because they really like what A says, but let's get rid of E. But let's take a closer look at what it's saying. So if rattlesnakes did not molt as often when food is scarce as they do when food is plentiful, if the amount of food they had available changed how much they molted, well, then the amount of food they had available would change the number of sections they have. And so I wouldn't be able to reliably determine the rattlesnake's age, because it might be something to do with the age, or it might just be something to do with the amount of food they have. And so I need to know, I have to know, that it doesn't matter how much food the rattlesnake has available, they'll continue to molt at the same rate, in order to know that I can reliably determine the rattlesnake's age from the number of sections in its rattle. So E is necessary for me to make this argument work. And so, even though A looked really good at the beginning, as I said, nearly half the people that do this question will jump at A and they'll be like, yep, this question's over, that's my answer. Even though, yeah, lots and lots and lots of people go for A, if you give each answer choice the sort of right amount of care and attention, we can see that A actually isn't necessary, whereas E really is necessary, and E is going to be our answer here. All right, so this what we've been talking about today with not falling in love with an answer choice, it's not something to obsess over. It's just something to have in the back of your mind. If you look at an answer choice, let's say again A or B early in a question, you're like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Just be a little bit skeptical. Don't let that affect how you treat C, D, and E. I still want you to read every answer choice really carefully, have a good think about it, because that's going to stop you sort of jumping at something that looks good at first glance and isn't actually the correct answer. All right, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you back here again at one of our other videos soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.